She was not born. She arrived. And when she did, on a night soaked in thunder and black ice, nothing in Lilith Greymire's village would ever feel natural again. Some said she had no shadow. Others claimed she whispered in languages no child should know. But what everyone agreed on is that Lilith knew things. Things she could not possibly have seen. Things buried, forgotten, denied. Before we drag open the hidden ledger of 1882, Lilith Greymire, and the secrets that science still refuses to classify, hit that subscribe button now. You'll need every scrap of awareness for what comes next. And trust me, once you hear this, you'll never see the world the same again. Like this video, too, because stories like this don't survive unless someone keeps the flame alive. Now brace yourself. The records you're about to hear weren't just lost. They were erased. Not by time, but by design. It began in the mountain town of Gallowmere Hollow, West Virginia. A fog-wrapped mining village wedged between two cliff faces and buried under ash trees that never bloomed. The kind of place where surnames outlived the people who bore them, and secrets festered longer than memories. In the winter of 1882, Reverend Aldous Renmore wrote a letter to the diocese in Charleston. In it, he described a girl in his parish, a child he claimed should not be. Nakana should not. He begged for intervention. He warned of patterns no child should perceive, of calculations written into the walls, and of a presence that observes even while it sleeps. That girl was Lilith Greymire, 11 years old, pale, voiceless, and somehow impossibly aware. She didn't speak for the first decade of her life. Not a word, not a sound, but she watched, constantly, from corners, from window panes, from doorways no one remembered leaving open. And then, one night, she began writing. Not letters, not journals, but maps. Maps of things that did not exist. Layouts of buildings that had long since burned. Diagrams of tunnels no one claimed to have built, but that the mining foreman swore were real. And on each of those maps was a single symbol. 3 concentric circles, each darker than the last, with a black dot in the center. The townsfolk called it the eye. It would appear on walls, on trees, even on the church bell. They began to whisper. Lilith wasn't learning these things. She was remembering them. The first time anyone tried to test Lilith Greymire, it was the schoolmaster, a man named Enoch Belford. He had no patience for what he called backwoods hysteria, and even less for rumors about a mute girl scribbling forbidden knowledge. He brought her into the classroom one cold March morning, placed before her a slate, chalk, a series of numbers, simple at first, then complex, then impossible. He told her to calculate the sum of all prime numbers under 1,000. She answered before he could finish the sentence. Then, he scrawled out a logic puzzle he had pulled from a British mathematics journal, a puzzle he had never solved. Lilith looked at it for 4 seconds, then calmly reached for the chalk and rewrote the problem. She didn't solve it. She corrected it. That's when he stopped speaking. He sent her home early, locked the classroom, and 2 days later, quietly left town for good. But that wasn't the strangest part. That night, Enoch Belford's home caught fire. Not a raging inferno, something far more precise. A single room burned, his study. The rest of the house was untouched. When the townsfolk sifted through the remains, they found his desk intact. But his private journal, his one cherished possession, was reduced to ash. The pages gone, the leather binding untouched. On the inside of the binding, scorched but visible, was a symbol. 3 circles, a black dot in the center, and scrawled beneath it in chalky gray script. You should not have asked. By now, whispers of Lilith's abilities had spread beyond Gallowmere Hollow. But no one official came. No doctor, no clergy, no scientist. Only letters. Letters that disappeared. Father Renmore would later testify, under oath, that he wrote to the church 3 times, once to Charleston, once to Baltimore, and once to the Vatican itself. All 3 replies were blank pages. Every envelope sealed. No words. Only the smell of sulfur and the faintest trace of wax burned too cold. Lilith continued to draw her maps. But the more precise they became, the more disturbed the townsfolk grew. Some claimed they matched ancient mining tunnels, long sealed off by cave-ins. Others said the patterns resembled constellations no longer visible in modern skies. But it was the widows who feared her most. They began calling her by a new name, the cartographer of death, because every time she finished a new map, someone was found buried beneath it. The fifth map was the one that broke the town. Lilith had drawn it in silence over 3 nights, scratching it into the wooden floorboards of the attic where she slept. Not on paper, not in chalk, but with a shard of iron she had pulled from the base of the old mining bell. When Greta Whistler, the local herbalist, came to deliver herbs to Lilith's mother, she found the girl crouched over the floor like an animal, tracing curves, etching spirals, her gray eyes wide and unblinking. The map showed 3 structures. 2 were houses that had long stood at the edge of Gallowmere Hollow, but the third had no address, no record, just a rectangle carved into the center of the map with the words, 7 below. 2 nights later, during a spring thunderstorm, the Wellings brothers, stonemasons by trade, decided to dig beneath the field where the third building had supposedly once stood. What they found was not a building. It was a staircase, carved stone, worn smooth, descending into the earth. 7 steps, then a door. No hinges, no handle, just a flat surface covered in symbols they couldn't read. They turned back, said nothing, but Lilith already knew. By morning, her mother found her asleep on the attic floor, the iron shard beside her, and a new word scratched in blood across the boards. Awakened. That's when the deaths began. Subtle at first. A heart attack here, a fall there. But each time, Lilith's maps had changed. Each time, a new name appeared etched along the margins. And always, always, another black circle drawn into the diagram. People stopped calling them maps. They began calling them ledgers. Father Renmore grew desperate. He fasted. He prayed. He even tried an exorcism. But Lilith didn't react. She didn't scream. She didn't resist. She watched, calmly, as if he were a child throwing a tantrum. She had not been possessed. She had been born chosen. But chosen by what? Some said she was a prophet. Others said she was a punishment. But a few, those who remembered the strange death from decades earlier, started asking a different question. What if she wasn't here to reveal the secrets? What if she was here to keep them buried? And if that's true, then every time she picked up that iron shard, she wasn't drawing. She was sealing something, someone, somewhere, down in the 7 below. The woman who came next did not belong to Gallowmere Hollow. Her name was Dr. Isadora Fenwick, a psychologist from Boston. She had read of Lilith in a fringe medical journal that never made it to press, because the printer died the night before its publication. Still, a single draft survived, smuggled through back channels, reaching the East Coast like a cursed whisper. Fenwick arrived unannounced. Sharp eyes, black gloves, and a case of instruments that made even the undertaker flinch. She wasn't here to observe. She was here to interrogate. From the moment she entered the Greymire home, everything about Lilith shifted. Her breathing slowed. Her pupils dilated. Her right hand began twitching. And most disturbingly, her map stopped. Not paused. Stopped. Dr. Fenwick took his progress. She kept Lilith in a controlled room on the 2nd floor of the Hollow's old meeting house. Blackout curtains. No symbols. No markings. Just a chair, a mirror, and questions. Each session was transcribed. But the recordings, those didn't survive. Because the phonograph used to record the sessions, it melted. On the 4th day, Fenwick asked Lilith a single question. Who is it that tells you where to draw? Lilith looked up slowly, eyes glazed like smoke glass. Then, for the first time in recorded memory, she spoke. One word. Soft. Cold. Utterly wrong. Below, Fenwick never returned to Boston. She was found outside the meeting house days later. Still alive. Knees scraped raw. Fingers broken. Each one snapped backwards. Her mouth sewn shut with fishing line. No blood. No screams. Just a look of terrible knowing in her eyes. When they finally cut the line from her lips, all she whispered was, "She doesn't draw the dead. She draws the debt." That word, debt, would become the town's obsession. Because as Lilith resumed her mapping, The symbols changed. New shapes, marks of balance, ledgers, and what appeared to be accounts. Names started reappearing. The same names. It wasn't just about who died. It was about who hadn't. And then the town began to understand. Lilith Greymire wasn't predicting death. She was collecting, tallying, and in the center of every map, a single circle remained unfilled. Until the night the church bell rang 13 times. No one had touched it, and no one heard it swing. But above them, in the attic where Lilith slept, a new map had begun. This map was different. It wasn't carved. It wasn't drawn. It was burned, scorched into the attic wall with such precision it looked etched by a machine or something older. The smell of sulfur lingered. The wood around the lines remained unblackened, untouched. Only the marks themselves smoldered, like veins of coal refusing to go cold. It showed the town, yes, but not the town as it was. It showed what lay beneath it. Not tunnels, not foundations, but chambers, circles, vaults, and symbols that spiraled inward toward a center that pulsed even though it wasn't alive. At the heart of the map, a single symbol no one could translate, until Greta Whistler, who'd once studied pagan etchings in Bavaria, recognized part of the sigil. It meant one thing: oath unbroken. The council convened. The priest begged for silence. The doctor wanted to send Lilith away, but it was too late. The town had already heard, and worse, the people had started dreaming the same map. Every man, woman, and child who had seen it, even briefly, began drawing it in their sleep. On walls, in the dirt, on their skin. Children woke with blood under their fingernails. Fathers scratched it into their fences with knives they didn't remember holding. And in every version of the map, one thing had changed. The center symbol no longer said, oath unbroken. It now read, oath denied. That was the night the ground groaned. Not a tremor, not an earthquake, but a voice. Low, deep, like something beneath the town had finally stirred. The sound cracked windows and killed every bird within 3 miles. And above it all, in the attic, Lilith sat upright, bleeding from her eyes, whispering the same phrase over and over. 7 below, 6 remain, 7 below, 6 remain. The bell rang 13 times again. But this time, the sound came from beneath, from under the chapel, under the floorboards. And when Father Renmore opened the trapdoor in the chapel basement, he didn't find dust or bones. He found steps, 7, descending, and someone had left them recently, because the 7th step was wet. The 7th step was slick with something dark, not blood, not water. It was thicker, slower, like ink that refused to dry. Father Renmore touched it. His fingers went numb. He didn't tell anyone. Instead, he summoned the remaining council members in secret. They descended the 7 steps together, torches in hand, breath tight in their chests. What they found beneath the chapel would never be spoken of in public again. The tunnel wasn't man-made. It bent in impossible angles like something trying to mimic human construction, but wrong. The walls were smooth, warm to the touch, and they pulsed. Not in metaphor, they pulsed. Like a throat, like something swallowing in reverse. 100 yards in, they reached a chamber. Round, ceilingless, and in its center, floating mid-air, was a figure. Small, pale, silent. Lilith. But she hadn't left her room. The nurse confirmed it. She was still upstairs, breathing, sleeping. Yet here she was, arms extended, head back, eyes open and blind. And behind her, the same map, burned into the stone. Except this one had a new word at its center. One returned. The council fled. Not all of them made it back. One man, Mayor Halberd, refused to leave the chamber. He knelt before the floating form of Lilith, whispering something no one could hear. When they dragged him away, he screamed like a child, hands clawing at the walls. He was committed within the week. The others swore silence, buried the steps, bricked up the trapdoor, burned the church records. But it didn't stop, because when they sealed the chapel, Lilith opened her eyes, for the first time in months. And she didn't blink. She just stared forward and smiled. She began drawing again that night, faster, with both hands. Now the maps weren't just of the town. They were of people, their veins, their nerves, their entire anatomy broken down into pieces. Some maps had names, some had numbers, and one, taped to the back of her door, was simply labeled, "You." Subscribe now to DeadScroll before we go deeper, because what's coming next will turn everything on its head. And halfway through this journey, we'll ask you to comment something that only the initiated will understand. Brace yourself. This isn't a haunting. It's a ledger, and the debt is growing. The doctors called it dissociation. The clergy called it possession. But what Lilith was doing night after night, without sleep, without food, was something older than both. She wasn't drawing anymore. She was copying. One-to-one recreations of ancient anatomy charts no one had ever shown her. Pages that matched 13th century alchemical manuscripts stored in restricted archives in France. She etched each image with impossible precision. Tiny runes lining the bone structures, symbols marked at pressure points, hidden glyphs behind the eyes, around the heart. Even the ink was wrong. The nurses swore she had no ink. And yet every morning, her walls were drenched in black markings. Her hands were clean. Her nails, however, were starting to crack from the inside out. Then came the 8th map. It wasn't like the others. This one didn't show a body. It showed a door. It was massive, engraved with 3 interlocking seals, and written in jagged lettering along the top. Only the witness may knock. Who was the witness? They didn't know until Greta Whistler, the same woman who had translated the attic map, found an old volume in the Hollow Creek Library's forbidden section. The book had no cover. Only one page remained. It read, "The witness shall be marked by the child whose eyes never shut." That night, a nurse screamed from Lilith's room. The child's eyes were open, but she wasn't looking at anything in the room. She was watching someone else. The nurse turned to the mirror and vomited, because in the reflection, she saw herself standing in the chapel basement, knocking. 3 slow knocks. The mirror shattered, and when they rushed in, Lilith was whispering to the wall, "He's coming. He's coming. He's coming." The next morning, the priest who'd once baptized Lilith was found dead in his home. His entire body folded into itself like cloth. His spine was bent perfectly backward into the shape of an eye, and carved into his chest, with a razor-sharp tool, were the words, "Witness confirmed. We're only scratching the surface. If you've made it this far, prove it. Comment below. The mirror lied. Comment it twice. Because when we reach the halfway mark, you become part of the map." The next 24 hours shattered any illusion of control. Lilith didn't eat, didn't sleep, but she grew. Not taller, not fatter, just more. The staff said her presence felt heavier, like she occupied more air than her body should. When you stood near her door, your ears rang, like pressure was building in your skull. Some nurses claimed time slowed down near her room. One man walked past her window and lost 4 hours. Then came the smell. Metallic, sweet, like rust soaked in perfume. It drifted down the hall in waves. They checked for gas leaks, mold, dead animals, nothing. And it was always strongest near the walls. That's when Greta found the second trapdoor. Not in the church, but beneath Lilith's room, covered in rotted carpet and bolted shut with nails that weren't from this century. When they removed the boards, they found the same spiral stairs, 7 again. But this time, the walls weren't stone. They were lined with skin, etched with names. Names of every girl who had ever lived at Hollow Creek. Some were scratched out, others burned. But at the very bottom, etched deeper than all the others, was a name no one recognized. Ira. When Greta whispered the name aloud, Lilith, 2 floors above, screamed for the first time in months. A scream so sharp that the windows cracked, and 2 nurses suffered ruptured eardrums. And in that moment, all the lights in the convent went out. When they came back on, Lilith's room was empty. The doors still locked, the windows still sealed, but her drawings were still wet. The final drawing she left behind? Not a map, not a door, but a birth certificate. The name on the certificate was Ira Hollow Creek. The date, 1766. The place of birth, the chapel basement. And written in blood across the bottom, returned in Lilith. This wasn't reincarnation. This was reclamation. And if you're still watching, subscribe to DeadScroll. because this story is unsealing something far more ancient than any church. And you're standing at the threshold now. The doors are opening, and not all of them lead back. By the next evening, Hollow Creek wasn't just haunted, it was awake. The sisters were forbidden to speak Lilith's name, but the silence only fed the fear. Whispers crawled through the halls. Some said she was seen in the reflection of holy water. Others claimed she had never left the chapel basement at all, that the thing walking the halls now was wearing her body like a veil. One sister, Sister Agnes, couldn't take it anymore. She locked herself in the sanctuary and began ringing the chapel bell repeatedly, crying out in Latin, Libera nosa malis, deliver us from evil. When the others forced open the doors, they found her collapsed at the altar, eyes bleeding, lips sewn shut with black thread they never found in the room. And on the altar, scorched into the wood, was a symbol. 3 circles, interlocking, the same symbol Lilith had drawn on the map to the door. Greta sent it to a scholar in Prague. 2 hours later, he called, screaming. The recording only captured one phrase before he vanished. It's not a symbol, it's a seal to keep it buried. That night, they opened the convent's hidden archives. Buried behind false walls were records never meant to be found, of 7 other girls throughout the centuries, all adopted by Hollow Creek, all described as gifted, all eventually unrecognizable. Every girl vanished by her 13th birthday. Every one of them linked to a shadow name, Ira, and each had left behind the same phrase before disappearing. He walks backward through time. What did it mean? No one knew, until Greta examined the chapel bell tower more closely and found, beneath the rust, carvings that shouldn't have existed in 1873. Carvings in English, though the convent was German Catholic. A single sentence. Lilith rang this bell. 1971. That was 98 years in the future. But the carvings were real. Carbon dated. Unforged. She hadn't just vanished. She had crossed. Into where, or when, no one could say. And the real horror? The next bell ringer was already missing. You just step deeper. Comment again. The mirror lied. Say it twice to be counted among the witnesses. And keep watching. The descent has only begun. August 3rd, 1873. The convent was in chaos. 3 novices had vanished overnight. No signs of forced entry. No struggle. No footsteps. Just beds left unwrinkled and shoes lined perfectly at the foot. In their place, 3 wax dolls, each carved with a different number on its chest. 7, 13, 21. Numbers that meant nothing to anyone, except Greta. They matched the floors of the original Hollow Creek Chapel, long since sealed beneath the current structure. A chapel rumored to have been built on pagan ruins before the Catholic Church even arrived. And on those floors, according to Greta's secret notes, were the gates of influence. 1st floor, confession. 13th floor, exorcism. 21st floor, rebirth. But the chapel only had 3 floors. The rest? Metaphysical, as in, invisible unless you knew how to see them. Greta was now convinced. This wasn't about Lilith alone. This was about the system that brought Lilith into being. An ancient pipeline, a kind of manufactured bloodline, designed to summon something that never died, only hid. That night, Greta followed the map again. But this time it shifted. The lines bled, like ink made of breath. New doors emerged on the paper. Doors not drawn, revealed. They led not to basements or cells, but to rooms that didn't exist. One was labeled the Chamber of Knots. Another, the Womb Without Light. And the third was simply called the Inverted Saint. Greta descended into the convent's laundry tunnels, lit only by oil lamp. The deeper she went, the colder the stone became. Not temperature cold, but the absence of all life, all sound. The kind of cold that remembered your name before you spoke it. When she reached the chamber marked on the map, there was no door, only a wall, until she whispered, Ira Hollow Creek. The wall pulsed, then breathed, and then it opened. Behind it, a staircase made of jawbones, and the sound of a girl humming a lullaby from the 18th century, one that had not been heard in 100 years. Greta did not step back. She descended, and what she saw next rewrote everything. Subscribe to DeadScroll. You're inside the Hollow Creek Vale now, and what's ahead is not human. Greta stepped onto the first stair made of bone, and immediately the door sealed behind her. No wind, no slam, just the eerie hush of decision. The tunnel curved downward in impossible geometry, like it was spiraling around an unseen void. The deeper she went, the more she noticed gravity felt broken. Her own heartbeat began to slow, not with fear but with alignment, as if something below was synchronizing her body to its rhythm. On the seventh step, Greta's lamp flickered out, but she could still see. The bones gave off a dull, gray glow, not light, but memory. They remembered who they had once belonged to. Children, women, priests, and something else Greta couldn't name. A species not human, not entirely. When she reached the chamber at the bottom, she found a door, made not of wood or stone, but of stitched-together habits, the nuns' garments of the missing. And pinned across the door in rusted needles were the names of the girls. But one name was pinned upside down, Lilith Hollow Creek. The door opened before she touched it. Inside was a theater, ancient, circular, seats carved into the walls like a Roman Colosseum, but much smaller and far older. In the center, a stone slab, slick with centuries of use. Greta was not alone. Seated in the upper ring were 7 wax figures, dressed as bishops, mouths sewn shut, each one holding a chalice filled with black salt. They didn't move, but Greta felt watched. At the center of the slab lay a girl. Not Lilith. Not yet. This girl wore an iron veil bolted to her skull. Her fingers had no nails, only burned stumps. On her chest, carved deeply into flesh, were the numbers. 333. Greta whispered, "Who are you?" And in a voice not from the girl's lips, but from within Greta's mind, came the answer. "I am what remains when obedience breaks." Then the bishops began to stand, and the door behind her disappeared. Greta was trapped in a ritual, one that had been waiting 142 years for someone to complete it. And now it had begun again. This is not legend. This is pattern. Comment again. The mirror lied. Say it twice. We're watching who sees. DeadScroll continues. Greta didn't run. She couldn't. Her legs were her own, but her will wasn't. Something inside the chamber gripped her consciousness like a vice. The bishops moved not like men, but like puppets pulling themselves by invisible threads. And above them, carved into the ceiling in Latin, was a phrase that made Greta's mouth go dry. Ego sum umbre Dei. I am a shadow of God. The girl on the slab opened her mouth, but no scream came. Only a sound like echoes inside a stone tomb. Her body arched upward, and from her spine emerged a black cord, thick and pulsing, like an umbilical chain, but reaching upward. Greta watched as it latched onto the ceiling. She recognized the pattern. It was the same design carved on the soles of the missing girl's feet. The spiral root. A symbol Greta once saw in a banned manuscript called the Anatomy of Obedience, written in 1632 and destroyed in Vatican purges. That symbol meant only one thing: spiritual inversion, taking the soul upward, not to light, but to its architect. The architect that created false sanctuaries to consume belief and spit out obedience. Greta turned, but there were no exits. Instead, the wax bishops began to chant, a low guttural hum, and the iron-veiled girl began to levitate. Her hands extended sideways. She took the pose of a crucifix, but upside down, and her voice, laced with hundreds of other voices beneath it, whispered, "We were born in the blood of prayer. We were raised in the teeth of Scripture. We are the veil." Greta stepped forward, and suddenly, all wax figures turned to her in unison. Each eye opened. Inside each was a small mirror, showing not her reflection, but what she would become if she stayed. Greta looked away, and in that moment, she saw Lilith. Not as a child, not as a girl, but as a queen, standing in the arch above the altar, barefoot, eyes hollow, mouth smiling wide. She spoke a single word. "Welcome." Greta fell to her knees, and the ritual truly began. Subscribe to DeadScroll. You've now entered the chamber of inversion. The truth is no longer optional. The ritual room shifted, not in architecture, but in perception. The space stretched and compressed, as if Greta's mind was being rewired to see what had always been there. The walls bled, but not with blood, with ink. It dripped slowly, spelling out verses, reverse psalms, words that could not exist in the world above. Words that bit into the eye just by reading them. The floating girl's body twisted violently. Each limb broke backward, one by one, and realigned into something inhuman, spidery, reverent, holy in the most monstrous way. She began to speak in multiple tongues at once. Aramaic, Latin, something that sounded like shrieking glass. And Greta understood them all. Not because she knew the languages, because she'd been chosen to understand. She was no longer an outsider. She was now inside the system that had taken those 312 girls. Each bishop now held a single object above his head. Not a book, not a relic, but a human jawbone, wrapped in rosary beads, teeth removed and replaced with eyeballs. The girl on the altar whispered, "Speak the name that broke you." Greta hesitated. Then, as if it had been waiting for centuries to be spoken, her voice said, "Mother Linearia." The name echoed like thunder. The wax bishops collapsed, melting into the stone like candles. The altar cracked. The walls peeled backward like flesh. And Lilith stepped forward. But this time, she was not a ghost. She was fully formed, older than her missing age, cloaked in ritual silks. Her skin was pale gray, her eyes black, and her shadow was cast in the wrong direction. "Do you know where you are?" Lilith asked. Greta shook her head. Lilith said, "This is where heaven ends and doctrine begins." Behind her, another door opened. Greta walked through it, pulled by a force that was not her own. And what she saw next was a place none of the nuns ever returned from, because it was never built to be escaped. This is not mystery. This is memory, unearthed. Comment again. The mirror lied. Say it twice. You're being noticed. DeadScroll continues. The room beyond the altar was not a chamber. It was a descent. A spiral staircase carved into raw black stone, so narrow that Greta had to turn sideways just to fit. The walls breathed. Not metaphorically, they moved, in and out like lungs made of flesh and scripture. Each step downward was colder than the last. Not the cold of nature. The cold of emptied faith. There were no torches, yet everything was lit in a faint violet glow. Light with no source. Only the markings along the walls pulsed. Circles of thorn, upside-down lambs, eyes sewn shut, and crucifixes where the Christ figure had wings instead of arms. As Greta descended, the sounds changed. Above, there had been chants and whispers. Below, only sobbing. Hundreds of voices. Some human, some trying to be human. She emerged into a narrow hall, lined with confession booths. But there were no priests. Only small girls, locked inside each booth, hands bound, eyes gouged, lips sewn, yet still alive. Every girl had a number branded into her forehead. Greta saw it clearly. Each was between 1 and 312. This is where they had gone. The missing, the forgotten. Not dead, not freed, just installed. Greta reached for the first booth, but a thin hand grabbed hers from the dark. It was Lilith again. "No," she whispered. "They cannot be touched. Not until the final vow is broken." "What vow?" Greta asked. Lilith stepped closer, and with a breath that smelled of myrrh and ash, she said, "The vow of silence, kept by the Mother Superior." Greta looked up. At the end of the hallway stood the Mother Superior of Black Hollow. But she was not alive. She stood like a statue, hands outstretched, veins like barbed wire. Her eyes were open, but her mouth had been filled with wax and stitched shut. She had taken the final vow, to keep the true purpose of the convent sealed behind silence and sacrament. Until now, because Greta had spoken her name, Greta had seen the spiral, and Greta would now be given her own booth. Unless she ran. But there were no exits, only forward. Subscribe to DeadScroll now, where we open the doors others sealed shut. Greta stepped past the frozen Mother Superior. Her waxen face cracked ever so slightly, as if aware that its silence had been broken. The hallway beyond was filled with fog, thick, low, and sweet-smelling, like burnt incense soaked in decay. As Greta entered, the door behind her sealed shut without a sound. This was no longer a convent. This was the Deep Archive. No one in Hollow Creek had ever spoken of it. No record mentioned its construction. No map contained its layout. And yet, beneath the convent, it had always been waiting. At the center of the chamber stood a stone pulpit, wide and covered in carvings of girls with no mouths. The fog parted, and seated on a high-backed throne of bone and old hymnals was Mother Lineria. Alive, but not unchanged. Her skin had turned translucent, and underneath, verses moved like parasites. They squirmed beneath her flesh, alive and conscious. Her tongue had been split, but each half moved independently, speaking two different languages, one ancient, one forbidden. "Welcome," she rasped. "You've walked the stair of the sorrowed. You've crossed the confession of the unremembered. Now read the ledger." She gestured to a single book resting on a pedestal, bound in black velvet and human hair. Greta stepped toward it, and then she saw the title. The names of the taken, 1 through 312. Each entry included the girl's name, her age, the year she was taken, and the reason she was chosen. Every reason was the same. She asked a question. That was all it took. Curiosity, in a place where obedience was currency, was the crime. And Greta had now joined them. She turned the last page. There was a new entry being inscribed by itself. 313, Greta Ellison, for refusing to forget. The ink moved on its own, as if the book knew her. She slammed it shut, but it didn't stop. The page turned back open. The entry burned itself in brighter. Mother Lineria began to rise, her bones audibly grinding against one another. "You have read the book," she whispered. "Now you must become its voice." Greta backed away, but the fog thickened. Voices filled the room. Children's voices. Chanting. The mirror lied. The mirror lied. And then Lilith appeared again, holding scissors, and she was walking toward Greta's lips. Because in the Deep Archive, readers are not allowed to speak. Greta screamed, but no sound came out. Lilith's scissors never touched her skin, yet her voice was gone, ripped from her throat like a page torn from sacred scripture. She clutched her mouth in panic, but the silence was inside her now. Not just an absence of sound, but a living, crawling thing. Around her, the chamber's fog began to pull back, revealing the rest. Dozens of women, dozens of girls, all dressed in scorched convent robes, all standing silently, all watching Greta. Some were young, some were impossibly old, but all had one thing in common. No mouth, not sewn shut, not gagged, just gone, as if speech had been surgically removed from their existence. Mother Lineria stepped forward, her fingers extended like a spider's legs. "You are not the first to descend," she said, "and you won't be the last." She waved her hand over Greta's head. A black veil appeared, draped itself over Greta's hair like it had been waiting centuries for her scalp. And then the choir began to sing, not with words, but with blood. Each girl opened her wrists in unison. Their blood spilled into grooves in the floor, spiraling toward the pulpit, forming a sigil that began to glow deep red. Greta stumbled backward, unable to scream, unable to look away. She saw the sigil's shape. It matched the same hidden design she'd found etched onto the church bell days ago. The same symbol beneath every nun's bed frame. And worse, the same symbol that had appeared on her own bedroom ceiling when she was a child. This place had been reaching out to her long before she arrived. She thought she came here by choice. But the convent of Black Hollow doesn't allow choices, only summons. And now, halfway into the ritual, her role had changed. She was no longer a visitor, no longer an investigator. Greta Ellison had become the next mother in silence. Unless she broke the vow, but no one had ever broken the vow, except one, and that one still wandered the woods. Half human, half memory, still speaking the truth she wasn't allowed to forget. And the nuns called her only one name, the Echo. They don't speak her real name anymore. To utter it is to invite her shadow. To recall it is to risk the wrath of the woods. But every nun in Black Hollow knows who the Echo is. Once she was the first to ask, Why does God need silence? She was punished, but she survived. And she didn't just escape. She remembered. The echo had once been a novice like Greta. Sharp-eyed, curious, dangerously unafraid of the Mother Superior's gaze. And long before Greta's arrival, she had descended into the deep archive, alone. But unlike the others, she spoke the names. She read aloud the list of the taken. She shouted them into the stone. She screamed them back into memory. And the convent punished her in a way worse than death. They carved her name out of every book. They pulled her record from every ledger. They erased her birth certificate. They said she never existed. But something went wrong, because in erasing her, they freed her. Now, she roams the woods beyond the convent boundary. Not quite spirit, not quite woman. A walking contradiction to the vow of silence. She speaks only in riddles. Her voice echoes exactly 3 times before falling back into stillness. And each echo is a warning. Some say she appears to girls who are about to be chosen. Others claim she stalks the halls of the convent when the bells ring out of sync. Greta had heard the story once. As a child, her mother whispered it in fear and quickly dismissed it as nonsense from the old women. But that story wasn't nonsense. It was prophecy, because now Greta could feel her presence. The fog began to part near the old archway behind the pulpit, and from the darkness emerged a figure in white. Her veil was torn. Her mouth was still open, and from it came a whisper that shouldn't have reached Greta's ears, but somehow did. Break the vow, or become the vow. Then silence. No footsteps, no breath, just the unmistakable scent of dried leaves and mercy. And for the first time, Greta realized the vow could be broken, but only if she was willing to lose everything. The veil on Greta's head tightened. It no longer felt symbolic. It felt parasitic. Something ancient, alive, feeding on her mind. But her fingers trembled with a new thought. The vow can be broken. The echo proved it. And if one woman could survive it, maybe another could too. She staggered toward the blood-soaked sigil on the floor. The nuns around her continued their ritual, oblivious to Greta's awakening mind. Their eyes were glassy. Their bodies moved like marionettes. But Greta wasn't bound yet. Not fully. Behind her, the old archway where the echo had appeared stood wide open. But no one seemed to see it, as if it only existed for her. She stepped back from the circle. 1 step. 2. Mother Lineria turned. Her eyes, once soft and maternal, were now black as ink. No whites, no pupils, just depthless void. You must complete the offering, she said, her voice layered with others. Greta shook her head. I never took the vow, she tried to whisper, but still no voice came. Lineria glided toward her. The vow was in your blood before you were born, she hissed. Your grandmother lit the first candle. Your mother whispered the first prayer. You were always meant to kneel. Greta turned and ran. The moment her foot crossed the sigil, the entire chapel screamed. Not with voices, but with walls. The stone itself howled, cracking in lines that ran like veins of fire. The nuns fell to the ground one by one, their robes billowing upward as if sucked toward the heavens. Mother Lineria's face twisted, no longer human, and Greta sprinted into the archway. Down. The steps beyond were ancient, carved from bone-colored rock that pulsed under her feet. This place wasn't a basement. It was below time, below memory. She didn't stop running until the sound of screaming stone gave way to stillness. Then she heard it, that voice again. 3 echoes, each softer than the last. Greta, you must unlearn the light, to see the truth beneath it. She turned. The echo stood once more, closer now, more visible, and Greta realized she wasn't leading her out. She was leading her further in. Greta could no longer tell if she was awake or dreaming. The air beneath the convent had weight, thick like water. Each breath took effort. Each heartbeat echoed like a war drum in her ears. And the echo, she didn't walk. She glided just ahead of Greta, her veil trailing like smoke. Yet her feet made no sound. The corridor twisted, its walls lined not with stone, but with pages. Pages torn from prayer books, confessions, medical records, baptismal logs. birth certificates, every one of them stamped with the same red mark. Excommunicata. These were the erased. These were the women the world had forgotten. The silence, the echo said without turning, was never holy. It was a cage. Greta finally found her voice, though it scraped her throat like broken glass. Where are we? The echo stopped. We are under the vow, where its roots grow, where its true face waits. Greta touched one of the pages. The ink moved. It swirled, rearranged itself. It spelled out her name, Greta Halvine, and below it, another name, one she had never seen, Merla Halvine, her grandmother. She was listed as a silent initiate, status withheld. Greta's blood turned to ice. What did she do? She whispered. She spoke, the echo replied. Spoke? Spoke what? Before she could ask, a sound broke the tunnel silence. A wet dragging, like chains being pulled across soaked stone. Then another sound. Laughter. But it wasn't human. It was gurgled, layered, multiplied, as though 100 mouths were trying to laugh through the same throat. The echo froze. She comes, she said, voice low. The keeper. Greta turned. From the far end of the tunnel, a shape emerged. Not walking but crawling. Limbs that bent the wrong way. Veil soaked in black oil. Face hidden behind a crown of thorns sharpened into blades. She didn't guard the vow. She fed on it. And now, she had smelled Greta's defiance. The echo turned to her, eyes glowing white. You must choose. Turn back and forget, or step forward and be remembered. Behind them, the keeper snarled. Greta looked forward and took one step deeper. The walls convulsed behind her. The keeper shrieked, a noise so piercing it split the air like shattered glass. But Greta didn't look back. One step became 2, then 3, until she was sprinting again, chasing the echo deeper into the tunnel that pulsed like a living vein. Where does this end? Greta shouted. The echo's voice was calm, unshaken. It doesn't end. It's remembered. They burst through a narrow stone arch, into a chamber unlike anything Greta had ever seen. The ceiling stretched impossibly high, yet no light came from above. Instead, the chamber was lit by an underground river of molten silver. It flowed in impossible shapes, looping vertically, spiraling like liquid scripture across the walls. And lining the chamber were statues, dozens, maybe hundreds, all women, all veiled. Some had hands raised in prayer. Others clutched their throats. But each one wore the same expression, agony held in reverence. Greta slowed, breathing hard, her chest aching with fear. What is this place? The echo turned. This is where the vow was born. A stone in the center caught Greta's attention. It was unlike the others, massive, cracked, and bleeding dark sap from its core. Upon it a carving, the first silence, and beneath that, for names, all scratched out. Only one remained legible. Merla, her grandmother. Greta's legs weakened. She was here. She was the last to try, the last to scream loud enough to break the vow. Greta stepped toward the bleeding stone. As she touched it, visions struck her like lightning. Her grandmother, chained, screaming, torn from her voice. A congregation of black-veiled nuns standing over her. Mother Linearia, younger, with eyes full of devotion, not cruelty. The vow hadn't always been evil. It had become evil, twisted by years of silence, by obedience, by fear. Then came the last vision. Greta, herself, bound by that same vow, kneeling where her grandmother had died. A future not yet written, but already waiting. She ripped her hand back from the stone. No, she whispered. I won't become that. Behind her, the sound returned. Wet chains, snarling laughter. The keeper was close, but the echo did not flee. Instead, she reached into her own veil and removed it. Her face was scorched, cracked, eyes glowing, but it was Greta's face. Older, tired, and holy. You've already been here before, she said softly. You just forgot. Greta's knees buckled, and the chamber doors slammed shut behind her. The doors sealed with a thunderous groan, cutting off the tunnel behind. The keeper's snarls were muffled now, but they pulsed in the stone in Greta's bones. She turned to the echo, her older self, trembling. "You're me?" "I was," the echo replied, "until I stayed too long, until I tried to carry the vow alone." Greta stepped back, her voice cracking. "No, no, this is some ritual, some hallucination. This isn't real." But the chamber began to pulse, heartbeat-like, slow and terrible. And the statues moved. Not fully, not yet, but their fingers twitched. Their mouths, previously closed, began apart. They weren't statues. They were preserved. Hundreds of silent sisters, fossilized in pain and obedience, waiting for the next in line to take their place. The echo continued, her tone darker now. This place was built to keep the vow alive. Every generation, one is chosen, one with blood that remembers, even if the mind forgets. Greta's mind spiraled. My grandmother. She was chosen too? She resisted. They buried her body. But her voice, they never caught it. And now it called Greta. A low hum began to rise from the chamber walls. It wasn't just sound. It was command. Kneel. Obey. Forget. The pressure behind Greta's eyes built until blood wept from her nose. The vow was trying to write itself into her soul. "You can leave," the echo said, "but you'll forget everything. You'll return to the convent. You'll live quietly, and the vow will move on." Greta clenched her fists. "And if I stay, you'll remember. All of it. Every woman silenced. Every girl erased. Every sin the church buried under marble and gold." The molten river around them swirled faster, glowing brighter, drawing lines of flame across the chamber floor. A circle. At its center, the first stone, still bleeding. It wanted a name. A keeper. A vessel. Greta stood, trembling in the doorway of her inheritance. She could still walk away, still live a life, still lie to herself. But as she looked at the first stone, and at her own face staring back through the echo, she knew this had always been waiting for her, and the vow would not die until someone did what no one else had ever dared. Break it. The chamber grew darker, though no light had truly dimmed. It was the presence. The vow had awakened. Greta stepped toward the first stone, and the molten river twisted around her feet like sentient vines, testing her, tasting her, remembering her blood. The echo stood behind the ring of flame, silent now, watching. "You said the vow remembers," Greta said, her voice shaking. "But does it fear?" Silence answered. But the statues, the preserved women, began to weep. Not tears, ash, as if their souls were disintegrating under a truth too heavy to bear. Greta pressed her palm to the bleeding stone. This time, no visions came. Only pain, white hot, ripping through her nerves like fire under skin. The vow was inside her now, clawing at memory, searching for cracks, searching for surrender. But Greta did not yield. She whispered through clenched teeth, "My name is Greta of Black Hollow Convent, daughter of Merla, granddaughter of Defiance. I am not yours." The stone cracked. Louder this time. A shriek split the chamber, not from the echo, not from the keeper, but from the stone itself. The vow was breaking, but not without a price. The flames circle around Greta, surged upward like a wall of hell, and the chamber walls began to collapse inward, the statues crumbling to dust. Greta turned to the echo. "Go," she shouted. "Get out of here." The echo didn't move. Tears streamed down her scorched cheeks. "You still don't understand," she whispered. "I can't leave. I am part of it now." Greta reached out, desperate, but the echo stepped back into shadow, her body already dissolving into ash. "I failed, but you might not." The molten river turned black. The vow screamed. The chamber shook with the force of a buried god unraveling. And in that chaos, a single voice, pure and untamed, rose from the center. Greta's, not chanting, not whispering, but screaming, not in fear, not in pain, but in defiance. A sound the vow had never accounted for. And from the cracks in the stone, something began to crawl out. Not a demon, not a spirit, but a memory that had been caged for generations. It had a name, and it whispered, "Free me." The voice was small, so small Greta thought she imagined it. But then it spoke again, not in words, but in a vibration deep in her bones. "Free me." From the cracked first stone, something moved. A small, writhing form. Neither child nor creature, half-formed from ash and blood. It crawled forward, leaving a trail of glowing heat, whispering memories with each twitch of its limbs. Greta fell to her knees. The vow was trying to anchor itself again, not just in her body, but in this new vessel. This was how it survived all these centuries. It wasn't passed down, it was reborn, and it was trying to become. The echo's final words echoed, now like prophecy. I'm part of it now. Greta stared at the half-born creature and saw its face. Her own, but younger, feral, empty, a version of herself unlived. One that could be molded, stripped, reprogrammed. A vow child. It reached for her. Greta's instincts screamed to run, but her hands were already moving, lifting the creature into her arms. Its flesh sizzled against her skin. It hissed softly, "Name me." And there it was. The trap. If she gave it a name, it would be real. The vow would live. It would wear her face, walk her path, speak her story, and control the next girl, and the next, and the next. The circle never ended. Unless, Greta whispered, "I won't name you." The creature snarled. The flames flared again. The chamber roared. Then, die forgotten, the vow hissed. But Greta didn't flinch. She looked at the creature and saw what none of the others had dared. Its fear. The vow was never about control. It was about erasure, making sure no girl ever believed she could say no. Greta stood. The molten river cracked. The first stone shattered completely. And Greta, holding the unformed thing in her arms, whispered into the heart of the vow, "I remember every name you try to bury." And then she stepped into the molten river. The vow howled. The creature shrieked. But Greta did not scream. She burned, and she remembered. There are silences that scream louder than any voice. When the chamber collapsed inward, it didn't sound like rock or fire. It sounded like 1,000 women exhaling at once. Not in pain, but in release. Above the ruins of the black hollow chamber, the old convent shook. Dust bled from its arches. Crosses cracked. And in the upper sanctum, where no one had prayed in years, a single stained glass window shattered inward without warning. And then quiet. No flame. No echo. No Greta. For 2 full days, the earth didn't settle. Beneath the convent grounds, no one dared to dig. The sisters of a new order who'd long since taken over Black Hollow sealed the chapel. They called it structural damage. But they knew something had changed. Because for the first time in over 100 years, no one disappeared. No girls fell ill. No voices whispered in the halls. No dreams turned violent. The vow had been buried, or perhaps consumed. But that wasn't the end. Not entirely. Because 3 weeks later, just as the fog returned to the moor, a child was found in the northern woods. Barefoot, covered in ash. Mute. The nuns took her in. She refused food, refused speech. But not once did she cry. They named her Marian, after the patron saint of lost girls. She never answered to it. One night, Sister Catriona sat beside her bed and asked, "Do you know who you are?" The girl finally turned and spoke one word. A name. Not Marian. Not Greta. But one from the old stones. One that hadn't been uttered aloud since the first vow was carved in blood. The sister staggered back in horror. The girl just smiled. And behind her, etched faintly into the window pane by something not quite human, was a message. The vow forgets, but we remember. Midway through this story, if you made it this far, comment below. We remember what they buried. Type it again. We remember what they buried. Because Greta did not die. Not fully. She shattered the chain. But the vow is never truly gone. It only waits. For a name. For a mouth. For a story. And the next girl who dares to speak. The authorities were never called. The New Order sisters claimed the child had been abandoned by travelers. A lie easily accepted, because no one wanted to look too closely at Black Hollow. Not anymore. But in the shadows of the convent, whispers began to stir again. Not from the vow. From the girls. They started dreaming. Not nightmares this time, but strange, lucid visions. In them, they saw a girl walking through fire, holding something cradled in her arms, singing in a language no longer taught. One by one, they began to remember things they'd never lived. Names, faces, old rituals. The matron tried to silence them, said it was the devil's work. But the girls wouldn't stop. They began carving symbols into the wood of their bedposts. Symbols long buried beneath Black Hollow. They were reclaiming what had been stripped from those before them. Memory had returned, and so had the resistance. Sister Catriona, the only one who'd seen the child speak that old name, began to fear something deeper. That the vow wasn't just broken. It had been transformed. It was no longer a weapon of silence. It had become a voice. 100 voices, woven into one, and they were beginning to speak through the children. But there was something else, more terrifying still. The girl who'd named herself never aged. She looked the same week after week. Her eyes hollow, her hands always cold. In the dead of night, she would walk barefoot to the sealed chamber entrance, now buried in stone, and stand there, silent, watching, as if listening for the next vow, or waiting to stop it. Some say Greta had returned in her. Others say the vow itself chose a new form, not of control, but of consequence. One sister claimed to see the girl staring into a mirror, whispering her own name backward, again and again, until the glass cracked. But the name didn't matter anymore. The story had been let loose. And stories, they cannot be caged forever, especially not the ones built on blood, silence, and forgotten girls. Subscribe to DeadScroll if you want more stories they tried to erase. And remember, when you speak the truth, the vow begins to break. The girl, whatever she truly was, never left the grounds. Year after year, she lingered in the convent's coldest corridors, never eating, never aging, always barefoot. She would appear in places no one saw her enter, standing beside lit candles that hadn't been lit in a century. Sitting at the organ, though no one ever heard her play, the girls began calling her the keeper, not out of fear, but out of reverence. Because every time one of them began to feel the old weight in their chest, the pressure, the dreams, the whisper of that oath pressing against their lungs, the keeper would come to their room in the dark and simply sit. No words, no sermon, just presence. And every single time, the darkness would lift. It was as if the pain had somewhere to go, as if it was being carried. The new girls never questioned it. They didn't ask who she was or why she never grew older. They only understood what every sister had once tried to deny, that something sacred and violent had happened at Black Hollow, and the silence no longer protected it. It haunted it. One of the elder sisters, long retired, confessed on her deathbed that the original vow, the one whispered by the founding nuns, was never about service or sainthood. It was a bargain, the promise of control in exchange for obedience. But obedience birthed generations of silence. And silence bred monsters. Monsters in habits, in pulpits, in uniforms. And when that final vow was spoken, when Greta descended into the chamber, it didn't seal away a curse. It fed it until she broke it. And now, it's loose. But it doesn't kill anymore. It remembers. The keeper is proof, a living ledger of those who suffered, a vessel of everything that was done, and a warning that anything built on silence will one day have to scream. So if you ever hear a voice in a church that doesn't match the words being preached, or a child standing barefoot near the altar who won't speak your name, do not run, do not kneel, just listen, because she might be trying to tell you where the next vow is being written. In 1979, a fire broke out in the southern wing of Black Hollow Convent. No source was found, no accelerants, no lightning, no electrical fault. The blaze consumed the dormitories where the newer girls had begun carving their visions into the walls. But when the smoke cleared, not a single body was found. Not among the sisters, not among the girls. The entire convent had vanished. Every soul inside. When investigators arrived days later, the fire still smoldered. But the strangest thing was the chapel. It was untouched, completely intact. Even the candles still stood, unburnt. And behind the altar, written in thick black ash across the stone wall, were words no one would claim. They have remembered us. The Vatican sent archivists, historians, a silence team. Within a month, all remaining records of the Black Hollow Order were sealed. Officially, the convent was declared a casualty of time, its true history buried beneath layers of doctrine, fire reports, and administrative erasure. But local whispers never stopped. Hikers in the surrounding hills claimed to hear music at night, children's voices singing hymns that were never recorded, and sometimes one barefoot girl standing in the ruined shadow, watching. In 1982, a schoolteacher exploring the ruins discovered a ring of hand-carved dolls, arranged in a perfect circle around the collapsed chapel. Each doll had a name pinned to its chest. None of the names appeared in any public registry, but every one of them matched names etched into the lost Black Hollow ledger, a document long thought to have burned in the fire. When asked why she was there, the teacher simply said, "I felt called." Not long after, she went missing. And in her classroom back home, carved into the chalkboard was the phrase, "We do not forget." The vow was never truly destroyed. It was transformed. Not a rule, but a network. Not control, but memory. And now it lingers like an infection beneath the skin of sacred spaces. Anywhere silence was once used to shield guilt. Anywhere oaths were taken for the wrong reasons. So next time you feel watched in a place of worship, don't look for a camera. Look for the girl with cold hands. Because the keeper still walks. And she is listening. The final sister to ever speak publicly about Black Hollow was Sister Mariana Devane. Old, withered, eyes clouded but sharp beneath the weight of memory. She appeared once, uninvited, at a closed-door academic panel in Oxford, where experts are discussing the psychological effects of post-war trauma on religious communities. She walked in without a word, sat down at the edge of the room, waited until the discussion veered toward delusion as mass hysteria. And then she stood. Her voice cracked, yet cut through the auditorium like a scalpel. "You think we imagined it?" she asked. "You think isolation makes little girls break that cleanly?" The room fell silent. Sister Marianne spoke for 27 minutes. No script, no notes. She described the underground halls, the relics buried beneath the altar, the sound of something ancient breathing beneath the prayer room floor. She detailed how confessions were never meant to cleanse, but to categorize, how each child's secrets were collected, bound, and stored, not for healing, but for leverage. She said the true purpose of Black Hollow wasn't sanctity, it was silence. And silence, when weaponized by faith, becomes the most obedient form of evil. When she finished, she turned to the audience and said, "Black Hollow didn't burn. It moved." She then placed a small box on the podium. Inside were 7 rosaries, each made of human teeth. The panel was shut down. The footage was never aired. And Sister Marianne disappeared 3 days later. But someone leaked the transcript. Just once. It spread like wildfire across old forums and conspiracy boards. Some said it was a hoax. Others claimed it was part of a larger Vatican disinformation campaign. But there was one message in the comments no one could trace, posted exactly at 3:03 a.m. It read, "The Keeper remembers you, Marianne. You're not alone in the dark." And beneath it, a list of names. Girls, women, dates, all matching those who were once whispered about, but never confirmed missing. You see, Black Hollow didn't die. It seeded. It changed shape, left the convent, entered systems, and now it's in files, institutions, hearts. Anywhere obedience is demanded without question, anywhere guilt is harvested for power, Black Hollow waits, and so does the Keeper. By 1990, something chilling began to happen across Europe and the northeastern United States. A string of institutions, convents, orphanages, boarding schools, reported a series of near-identical events. First, the whispering. Then, the discovery of ancient symbols carved behind walls and under floorboards. Finally, children vanishing during sleep, leaving behind only handwritten notes. We've been chosen to listen. Investigators found no signs of break-ins, no signs of struggle, but in several cases, there was one consistent object found in the rooms. A single black veil soaked in salt water. Local law enforcement dismissed the cases as coincidence. Runaways, feral urban legends. But intelligence communities were less convinced. In a declassified 5 memo, there was a chilling remark. It is the belief of this office that the disappearances correlate with a resurgence of a suppressed order once buried by Vatican archives under the designation Order of the Black Hollow. Recommend silence until internal vetting concludes. That vetting never concluded, because those who investigated it too closely started dreaming of the chapel. Even those with no known connection. High-ranking officers in London, archivists in Boston, priests in Marseille, all reported similar dreams. A stone chapel under moonlight, the sound of young girls singing in Latin, and a faceless woman watching from the doorway. In each dream, the woman never moved until the final night. Then she would approach, extend her hand, and say, "Confess," or "Remember." Most who had the dream woke up screaming. Some were found in catatonic states. A few didn't wake at all. And in each of their homes, one thing remained untouched. A page torn from an unknown journal. Always the same line. The keeper listens through the faithful. That phrase, whatever it means, has now been reported in over a dozen unrelated cases tied to missing persons within cloistered or heavily religious institutions. No patterns, no clear purpose, just shadows and robes and memories no one recalls ever making. Some believe it's a psychological contagion. Others, a ritual system resurrecting itself through forgotten trauma. But among those who've truly studied the Black Hollow legacy, they whisper something darker. That the original keeper was never human to begin with, and that she still waits, hungry, awake, and multiplying through every sacred silence left unbroken. That in the spring of 2003, an anonymous audio tape surfaced on a fringe website devoted to forbidden religious texts. Its origin was untraceable. The file name was simply sister_47.final. The first 30 seconds were static. Then came the voice of a young girl, no older than 12. Her tone was calm, controlled, almost hypnotic. She recited what sounded like scripture, but it wasn't from any known Bible or catechism. Blessed be the silence, for through it the eye awakens. The listener returns not with trumpet nor fire, but with breath inside the guilt. Then came a sound, not words, not music. It was rhythmic, wet, like something crawling beneath stone. The girl continued, whispering phrases that blended Latin, Aramaic, and what analysts called pre-Canaanite tongues. Near the end, her voice changed. A second voice overlapped with hers, lower, gnarled, and human. Together, they chanted. We were buried so they could forget, but the walls remember, and the keeper is no longer chained. Then silence. But if you turn the volume up at the last moment, just before the tape cut, you could hear something breathing, not through a speaker, but as if it was in the room with you. Researchers who studied the tape reported nausea, hallucinations, and vivid dreams involving underground corridors and distant church bells. 2 analysts at the Vatican's secret archives were hospitalized after playing it repeatedly. One scrawled the same word into his bed sheets using his own blood. Black Hollow. The tape was order destroyed, but it keeps reappearing on encrypted channels, inside USBs mailed to former nuns, even hidden within the metadata of random religious choir tracks uploaded online. Some believe listening to it is a rite of passage, an invitation to be found. Others say it's bait, that the keeper has learned to crawl through sound, and that those who listen become echoes. In the end, one detail haunts investigators most. The girl's voice on the recording? It matched perfectly with a child who vanished in 1944 from Black Hollow's eastern wing. Her name? Annabeth Duclair. She would be 71 years old. But on the tape, she never aged. Just like the curse buried beneath the convent's foundation. The silence that remembers. By 2011, a former Vatican archivist named Father Tomas Villari broke his oath of silence and published a 43-page document under a pseudonym. It was titled simply, The Daughters Who Did Not Die. He claimed the Black Hollow Convent was never closed. Not officially, not spiritually, because its purpose, its function, could not be decommissioned. The building, he said, was constructed over a sealing site dating back to the 4th century. The stone chapel below had not been designed for worship. It had been built to trap something Father Valari's writing was fragmented, half delirious, written during his final months in a psychiatric ward in Geneva. But within the chaos, there were patterns, descriptions of a massive black reliquary, hidden deep beneath Black Hollow, encircled by carved iron. It was called the Chamber of Listening. Inside, chained and faceless, was a presence that predates all known theology. One not exorcised but fed. Every 40 years, according to Valari, the veil thinned. The convent would experience disappearances, spontaneous bleeding from stone walls, voices speaking from drains, and the reanimation of those who had once taken the veil. But worst of all was the ritual known only as the Mass without witness. It took place in total darkness. 7 veiled girls. No light, no words, only silence, and the scraping of nails on stone as something was welcomed. Father Valari said those girls did not die. They were offered, not as victims, but as vessels. He named them Annabeth Duclair, Magda Breyer, Lillian Marin, Isolde Quinn, Verena Alms, Josephine Morel, and lastly, Isabel Thorne. The same names found carved into the underside of the Black Hollow altar during a secret renovation in 1963. All girls officially missing. All girls seen years later, unchanged, untouched by time, walking barefoot across church ruins in different countries. Some are photographed, but the faces in the photos were always blurred, as if something rejected their capture. Father Valari ended his document with a single line, scrawled in trembling ink. They walked to remind the world that silence cannot hold her forever, that she listens still through the ones who listen best. And underneath, the symbol of the convent, burned into the paper itself. The black veil, the open eye, and the mouth that never closes. I, in 2017, a cold case investigator named Marla Denswick, working out of Providence, Rhode Island, reopened a series of reports involving young women who disappeared for religious boarding schools between 1952 and 1983. There were 12 cases in total, all girls between 13 and 17. All vanished during overnight silence fasts. Each girl had reported hearing hymns beneath the floorboards days before they went missing. Marla cross-referenced the cases with Vatican records, archival blueprints, and private asylum logs, many of which had been buried under ecclesiastical privilege. What she found was staggering. Each school where a disappearance occurred had been designed by the same architect, a man named Elijah Rourke, a name long thought lost to time. But here's where it becomes unexplainable. Elijah Rourke had been executed for heresy in 1662. He was burned at the stake in Rouen, France, for constructing structures to ensnare divinity. Yet the blueprints from the 1950s bore his signature, down to the unusual architectural anomaly. A sealed room, always beneath the chapel, labeled only as the Hollow. When Marla tracked down one such room in Vermont, it was beneath the ruins of a destroyed boarding house called St. Winthrop. It had been abandoned since 1974. She managed to descend into the hidden cellar, alone, with a body cam recording every moment. What she captured has never been released to the public, but the transcript leaked 6 months later. I hear singing. Soft. It's children. No, not children. That's wrong. There's something moving behind the walls. Oh God, there's a veil nailed to the beam. It's moving like it's breathing. The air just dropped to freezing. I can't breathe. There's a face, it's not a face. It's like the memory of a face I never had. Marla's body was found 3 days later. No cause of death. No signs of trauma. Her eyes had turned jet black, with eyelids sewn shut from the inside. She was buried in a closed casket ceremony. And yet, 6 months later, a woman matching her description was seen at Notre Dame de la Miséricorde in France, kneeling silently at the altar, wearing a black veil. The priest who saw her approached, but before he could speak, she turned and whispered, "The veil is never lifted, only offered." He died in his sleep that night, hands clasped in prayer, eyes wide open, and around his body, drawn in salt, the symbol of the hollow. You were never meant to hear this story. You were never meant to question why Black Hollow Convent vanished from history, or why entire generations of women went missing behind its stone walls. never to be acknowledged. But here you are, and now you know. The veil was never just a cloth. It was a pact, a contract of silence made not with God, but with something older, something that feeds on obedience. Every nun who took that vow, every girl forced in a hush, every voice that was swallowed by the stone corridors, they weren't forgotten. They were transferred, bound into an order that does not exist on any map. Black Hollow was never destroyed. It ascended into memory, into whisper, into doctrine. And now, wherever faith is weaponized to silence the helpless, wherever the voice of the innocent is crushed in the name of ritual, it returns. Today, the Vatican denies all knowledge. The land remains abandoned, but strange visitors still appear. Always barefoot, always veiled, never speaking. They bring nothing with them, only the vow. We end where all horror stories begin, not in blood, but in silence. And if you've watched this far, you're no longer just a viewer. You're a witness. The truth does not rest in the ashes of the convent. It lives in every institution that teaches obedience over truth, every altar that masks guilt with purity, every sacred place where questions are punishable. Before we end, comment the phrase, "The silence remembers." Let it echo in the comments. Let them know we're not afraid to speak. If you believe stories like this need to be told, subscribe to DeadScroll now. We uncover what others fear to even whisper. The vow is broken. The gate is open. But beware, some doors, once opened, will never close again. And next time you hear a hymn in a place that should be empty, do not respond. Do not hum along. Do not bow your head, because that's not worship. That's invitation. And the hollow is always listening. DeadScroll is watching. And we're just getting started.